Reason why I think with absolute certainty, actually, that you can't put the genie back in the bottle, and that when you do, when and if you're an organization that compels your workers to being fully present all of the time, you're likely to experience more of the Great Resignation trend than otherwise. The pandemic has just lifted the lid on a lot of latent desires that workers have, and indeed the C-suite have, to be human in a machine age, to have a life, to have space, to be with your families or to do your washing, and also to have colleagues, also to have a community in a workplace. One of the things that's been surprising to everybody is that after nearly 2 years of the pandemic, we're experiencing something called the Great Resignation. And that means in practice that in America, something like 3% of the workforce quit their jobs in 1 month in August, about 4 million people. And that may not seem like a lot, but in fact, it caught, if you like, the imagination, because it really, the Great Resignation really the Great Resignation is really a symptom of a certain kind of malaise that after the pandemic, people aren't just rushing back to the office. Yes, they're missing certain aspects of camaraderie and work from home is absolutely not all it's cracked up to be for everybody all of the time, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But the Great Resignation is a cultural moment. It's people rejecting the idea that work was fabulous and doesn't need amending. And there's some data to back that up. So before the pandemic, the World Health Organization declared stress as the health epidemic of the 21st century. And in the EU alone, 60% of working days lost are lost to stress. And stress is, of course, highly related to work and the toxic workplace. Everybody knows what that means in popular culture. Some of the best watched programs on television, from Succession to Mad Men to The Office to The Parisian, at the heart of it is actually office dysfunction. So nobody can pretend that the office was healthy. And let's just be clear, the office is a sort of byword now for modern work. So I think that work does need to be reimagined, just to be completely clear. I don't want to point the finger and say there's one single source of blame, although anyone calling themselves a manager or a leader does, I think, have to be in the crosshairs. But no, you can't say that work was working perfectly before the pandemic. And I do think this is a fantastic moment to reset and to have the kind of great reimagining as well as the Great Resignation, or rather instead of the Great Resignation. I think hybrid is here to stay, but I think there's absolutely no one size fits all. And in my book, I refer to hybrid haves and hybrid have-nots. What I mean by that is not so much the frontline workers who don't have any choice and have to turn up for a fixed place of work, but I'm talking about the large swathe of knowledge workers and office workers whose primary machinery is a laptop, who do have some choice and agency. And for them, the hybrid have and have-nots will be, do you work for an enlightened workplace which really gets the best from you and with you, and acknowledges that some of the time you don't need to show up to an office? Now, that's really complicated. I called my book The Nowhere Office, not because I advocate no office. It's to reflect this in-between nowhere place, this liminal transitionary moment where I think it's fair to say nobody is expecting the office to go back to exactly how it was before. People have experienced too much change. They've experienced the savings of time and stress and cost on the commute. They've experienced the virtue and value of technology working pretty well, not completely replacing face-to-face, not replacing the social capital benefits. There are many, many reasons to go into an office. But there are many, many reasons to argue that going into an office in the same way, on the same days, consistently won't work for everybody. And so hybrid is both here to stay, but I would say it's hard. And I would say it's not one size fits all. I'd also like to point out that quite a lot of commentators are getting muddled about the difference between, say, hybrid, part-time, and fully remote. They're not the same. Fully remote is not desirable in the sense that it may work for very particular digital first organizations, but what you'll find is even they compensate, if you like, by having lots of digitally face-to-face meetings. So no one is advocating a situation where the human is taken away and the machines take over. Humans need to do what we're doing, which is, I hope, having a perfectly reasonable conversation mediated through a screen. It would be different in person, but it is possible technologically. Fully remote, however, is not really an option unless you happen to work in a very specific industry and probably have no dependents, no caring responsibilities, no kids, no parents, no whatever. So hybrid is very different from fully remote. I think it will become the norm. And I've called my book The Nowhere Office because we are nowhere near where it's going to end up because it's so complicated. And we're definitely nowhere near to going back to full occupancy 5 days a week of offices. That, I would say, is over. What I am saying with absolute conviction is that the office life, that is the 40% of workers in the developed economies who are classed as knowledge-based service sector workers, who are the fastest growing sector of workers in the world. And there's over 3.3 billion people working. Those knowledge workers have tasted through technology, through the pandemic, through the changing demographic of younger Gen Zs. They've tasted freedom, and you cannot put that genie back in the bottle. And so what you're going to find, I think, at the very least, is that the offer of hybrid working in a meaningful, manageable way, whether that's 2 days a week or 3 days a week, or purposeful going into the HQ for very particular reasons, training, social, big ticket meetings, you're going to find that is part of the allure to attract and retain workers in the way that perhaps pay and perks and job titles and travel used to be. And that is a massive shift, because that's shifting power away from top down, the boardroom, buying you with the brand and with the glamour and with the pay, and actually being bottom up, which is, how do people want to live as well as how do people want to work? In other words, for me, productivity is about purpose. It's about values. It's come into the space that the pandemic has opened up. The point about the office is the losers, I think, are going to be big property conglomerates who simply won't be able to fill the space in the same way. You're not, that there's a revolution is going to happen there in city centres and in big corporate office space. But the winners will still be those organizations that can provide stability, community, leadership, good governance to their teams. And those teams are going to want to get together in an HQ, but they're just not going to want to get together all the time. And the analogy I use in my book is that of the family, or even the blended family. We get together for Christmas and holidays and high holy days and masthead events. The family, the organizational family, will come together for these masthead events into a space, which is a very different thing from everybody comes in on a Monday and a Tuesday and a Wednesday and a Thursday. I think those countries that are larger and have, by necessity, geographically distributed workforces, or operate in different time zones, I think they're going to get the hang of this much more quickly. Well, if I had a magic HR wand, which I don't, and with the caveat that I'm a commentator and an observer rather than in the weeds of actually doing, So I totally understand any HR leader looking at this going, well, it's all right for her. If I had an HR wand, however, I would say, first of all, admit what's not right. This is your moment to clear the cupboard. Admit what doesn't work. Admit where the conflict is between what the board may be asking. Maybe it's the time frame that's unfeasible, whatever. Hear what's going wrong. Come up with no more than 3 things over the next 3 months that would make a difference. And then set about having a very small team to help you realize those 3 things. Keep it small, keep it simple, keep it focused, and keep it real.